Raised by another, or raised by an other? Either way, this is a game-changing episode. Welcome to the Lost Explained episode guide, where we will be exploring and explaining the TV show Lost, episode by episode, mystery by mystery. Please bear in mind that this is a spoilerific guide in every conceivable way, so you have been warned. The 10th episode of Season 1 is a Claire-centric storyline that details the very weird series of events that brought her to the island, and her absolute steadfast certainty that she is not safe whilst on it. We see her frustrations with not being believed grow, her relationship with Charlie deepen, and Hurley decide to take a census of his fellow survivors that will reveal the ringer amongst them. I really enjoy this episode, and I know it has some detractors, but I'm going to tell you why I think it is one of the very best of Season 1. There are episodes in every first season of a show that change the game. Raised by Another is that episode. Even though people tend to historically write it off because it's about Claire, and she's a character who generally gets short shrift, both inside the show and amongst the fan base. And it is true, Claire does suffer from being maligned as the seasons progress, weighted down to a baby Aaron pretty much 24/7, although she does get a brief reprieve from motherhood and a cool side quest with Kate and Rousseau in Season 2, which is another significant episode in the mythology. But look, it's not easy being a young single mum on a desert island, and poor Claire is doing her best under insane circumstances. She's raising a baby that she wasn't even sure she wanted to raise in the first place. The whole reason she was on the plane was to give the baby up for adoption. So she is working through a lot of that guilt and emotional conflict in this first season. Season 1 Claire has interesting dilemmas going on, but the writers do eventually run out of ideas for compelling storylines for her, and by seasons 3 and 4 she has very little to do beyond revolve around Charlie's troubles. And that's a real shame, because I actually really like Claire, and Emily de Ravin makes a character who is sometimes a little underwritten and underserved by the story feel fully realised as a larger part of the cast than she really is. Ultimately, Claire is a side character and not a major player. She's there to motivate other characters such as Charlie, Kate, Jack, the Oceanic group in general, and even the others. Because a pregnant woman brings stakes to the drama of survival. She must be protected from the dangers of the island. She brings vulnerability to our group of losties, and by design is there to provide plenty of storyline potential. So this innocent mother and her son are frequently used as pawns in games that are bigger than them, and fought over by various forces within the show. First it's Ethan and the others, looking to solve their pregnancy crisis. Then it's Rousseau trying to use Aaron as bait and a bargaining chip. We later see Aaron become the linchpin of Kate's story, which brings her into conflict with Claire, and Claire eventually becomes a recruit of the Man in Black, with her soul hanging in the balance as she transforms into the new Rousseau. I tend to view Claire, and by extension Aaron, as sort of the heart and soul of the group. They represent the promise of a new beginning on this island, a fresh start, tabula rasa, bringing a humanity and innocence to this situation that the group can strive together to protect. Hell, even Sawyer comes to fiercely defend the sanctity of this mother and son. Claire's presence in the story was always a reminder of why this group of people became a family. They essentially build their community around her in some respects, and her newborn represents hope for them all, which is perfectly embodied by that scene on the beach in Do No Harm, when a euphoric Claire introduces Aaron to her fellow castaways for the first time. In this respect, Claire and Aaron were extremely important to the development of these characters as both individuals and a collective. And it's no coincidence that once Claire is separated from her child and the rest of the group in Season 4, that is when the group loses its heart and soul. It is when the dark period begins for all of them, both for the Oceanic Six off the island and those lost in time on the island. Without Claire, the moral compass has gone haywire. The hope of better days ahead, of new beginnings, completely shattered. No matter how much Jack and Kate, and Sawyer and Juliet try to play house, it's an illusion. They cannot be settled in their happiness because the person they all wanted to protect who meant so much to each of them, is still out there in the darkness somewhere, and until she's reunited with her child, the family will remain dysfunctional and fractured. The heart and soul must be reunified. I said up top that this episode was a game changer, and it absolutely is. Raised by Another is just a treasure trove of mythological setups that will continue paying off for many more seasons to come. It introduces prophetic dreams, which connects a character's subconscious with the power of the island, and it does this in the same episode in which the show establishes that there are indeed psychic characters in this universe who have powers, as nebulous as those powers may seem. Keep in mind this is several episodes before Walt is revealed to have powers of his own. Raised by Another also officially reveals the others and their deceptive ways, that our castaways have an enemy on this island that they will have to face and fight. It demonstrates that there is a supernatural power out there in the ether that is manipulating people's paths to come to the island, intervening directly in events to make sure it gets what it wants. And it all ends on a cliffhanger that is designed to take this show from an episodic Dilemma of the Week survival show into a full-blown serialised adventure mystery show. This is when Lost really gets going as a story, in my opinion, because up until now it's mostly been without an overarching plot. Between this and Solitary, we now have multiple threads to follow. I also dig the atmosphere of this episode. Right off the bat, Claire's dream is legitimately unsettling, and I remember being freaked out by it when I first saw it back in the day, and that unease and foreboding continues throughout the episode. There's this sense that something big is about to go down, that this isn't just another Dilemma of the Week. Someone is preying upon Claire in her sleep, and because we're seeing the episode from her point of view, it doesn't seem ambiguous. The threat feels real because we can see and feel Claire's dread, and her flashbacks go on to show us that she had been warned. Speaking of, Claire's backstory gets off to an intriguing start. We meet Claire just as she finds out that she is pregnant, and her live-in boyfriend Thomas, who as many have pointed out eerily looks like a young Michael Emerson, encourages her to have the baby so they can play house together. Unfortunately, Thomas turns out to be a cowardly little wretch who leaves Claire in the lurch, mere months before she is due to drop. But what could have been a familiar young single mum melodrama that we have seen many times before quickly evolves into something far more strange and unusual. The flashbacks are constructed around increasingly intense visits to a psychic by the name of Richard Malkin, who tells Claire that she must raise her baby, or else. Claire is obviously struggling to come to terms with the fact that she's going to face raising a child alone, and has decided to give the baby up for adoption. However, as we all know, that is not her path. She doesn't realise it yet, but she is part of a chain of events that will decide the fate of humanity, and her thread is already weaved into the tapestry of time. But everyone finds their way to the island in different ways. In Claire's case, it's by rubbing shoulders more directly with the supernatural and fate. All of the flashback scenes with Malkin work for me in this episode. They offer up plenty of ambiguity to chew on, and of course raise many questions, some of which we shall answer in the next section, but it's worth noting that this is the first episode of the show to demonstrate that weird things happen off of the island too. It's not just our characters making various big and small choices that lead them onto Oceanic 815, there's something else guiding them. These flashbacks show us that this influence, or entity, for lack of a better term, is everywhere. I think Nick Jameson's performance as the psychic Richard Malkin is really wonderful, despite his uneven Australian accent, which I know he's been criticised for. He plays it entirely straight in this episode, and there is no sense that he's being insincere with Claire, and that's what makes it so unsettling and creepy. He really believes what he is telling her, and that's why Claire comes to believe it too. And this whole backstory actually has a fallout for her on the island, because she is coming to terms with the fact that she is only days away from giving birth, and she feels immense guilt as to why she was on that plane in the first place. It's established that Claire is quite open-minded to the mysteries of the universe. It was previously established that she was into astrology, and this episode reinforces that by showing her as being a person willing to go to psychics for readings.
It's just a psychic, Claire. I mean, I thought you were all into this, all your astrology stuff.
Yeah, I know, but I don't need somebody telling me, what's going to happen or
how to live my life.
In my favourite scene in the episode, and indeed one of my favourite scenes from season 1, Claire reads into the signs of her adoption signing. One pen not working can be shrugged off, but 2 pens not working in a row, for someone like Claire, that is the universe telling her something. And she's right. So Claire is a believer, and on some level I think she views the plane crashing and her becoming trapped with her unborn baby on the island as a sort of karmic punishment. You're not supposed to give the baby up, Claire. Emily de Ravin really comes into her own as the character here, and gives easily one of the most sympathetic performances in the first season, communicating a deep vulnerability and uncertainty. And who doesn't feel bad for this poor girl's situation? She has it the hardest out of everyone on that island. Raising a baby is already difficult enough in modern society, never mind doing it whilst cast away on an island with total strangers, without normal food resources, and surrounded by danger and threat. I think Claire had bags of potential as a character, but the writers never quite deliver on her promise. I think there is valid criticism in the fact that de Ravin's range might be a little bit limited, but to be fair to her, she's rarely given the chance to rise above the baselines of the character for the next few seasons, at least not until season 6, where her character takes a more interesting turn. Charlie is probably the second most crucial character in this episode, as he becomes Claire's confidant, and the only person truly supporting her and willing to believe her story. Obviously, that willingness to believe is rooted in burgeoning romantic interest. Charlie is clearly crushing on her pretty hard, but Claire is in no fit state to be fielding affections, and I think it makes their whole relationship and dynamic far more interesting as a result, mirroring a lot of real-world dynamics between men and women, in which one person might want more, but must settle for friendship instead. I think many people watching Charlie and Claire together can really relate to those interactions. It's also worth remembering that the last time Claire trusted a man to be part of her life, he profoundly let her down at the worst possible moment. She was burned in her last relationship and was left holding the baby, literally, so her defences are up around Charlie for a while. And Charlie hasn't become as possessive with her yet. So there's a real sweetness and innocence in how their scenes are played, particularly in this episode. One might even say that they are rather charming together.
Thanks, Charlie.
You're quite welcome.
The B-plot on the island sees Hurley conducting his census, which is really just a plot device for exposing Ethan at the end. Special shout out to Boone, criticising Hurley's plan as being like the Patriot Act.
Well, maybe we're just not cool with you setting up your own little Patriot Act, man.
He's a liberal.
Which is a reference that dates the show to the Bush era and the War on Terror. I also have to chuckle at Shannon explaining to Hurley that Boone is a liberal, as if he were the only one on the island and such creatures were rare mythical beasts in America. Now, the writers did introduce William Mapother in the previous episode to give him some setup. Otherwise, his appearance in this episode would have made it immediately obvious that he was the culprit attacking Claire. But despite their best efforts, there was something immediately suspicious about him, even in solitary. And I've watched this show with multiple people in the past, and almost everyone noted him with suspicion. I mean, let's be honest, the scene between Hurley and Ethan in the woods sticks out like a sore thumb, with the show rather unsubtly directing our attention to this man all of a sudden. I think the writers could have integrated this twist a little bit better if they'd had Ethan show up much earlier in the season with the castaways as a recurring guest star, just so moments like this wouldn't feel so obvious. If he'd popped up in the background and had a few lines from, say, White Rabbit onwards, we wouldn't be nearly as suspicious as we are by the time we get to this episode. We just view him in the same way we view a character like Rose. Compounding this problem is that Mapother was clearly one of those faces at the time that you might have recognised from playing henchman and bit villain parts. But more interestingly, he is also Tom Cruise's cousin, which gives him this uncanny familiarity. When you look at his face, it's like you know him from somewhere, and I suspect that might have been part of the reason he was cast. Well, that and the fact that co-creator J.J. Abrams had just made a Mission Impossible movie with Tom Cruise, so the connection with the show was already there. And is it a coincidence that Cruise plays a character called Ethan Hunt in those movies, and the Lost Writers Room decided to call this character Ethan as well?
Don't mistake coincidence for fate.
Either way, Mapother is pretty iconic in the role. He was the first face of the others for us, and he was consistently creepy whenever he popped up, even though the majority of his appearances are actually posthumous. I don't think the show ever really topped Ethan's creepiness, which was helped along by literally having no clue about where he came from or what he wanted. The atmosphere and intrigue of Season 1 was often assisted by the fact that the writers didn't really have to reveal anything, and most of it was left up to our imaginations. With all that said, despite Ethan already being the obvious prime suspect for attacking Claire, the ending of this episode still lands with a massive impact. Because the twist is less to do with Ethan being a creeper, which was obvious, and more to do with the fact that he wasn't even on the plane.
One of them isn't in the manifest. He wasn't on the plane.
And this was the moment that really turned Lost into the king of cliffhanger television. It remains one of my favourite cliffhangers from the series. The way it is cut and paced out is just pitch perfect. This is a legit great episode of Lost that was putting the show firmly on the path to what it would eventually become. Claire is served very well by the storylines presented both on the island and off the island, even though she is about to be written out of the narrative for the next few episodes. And that momentum that has ramped up from the 3-punch combo of Solitary, Raised by Another, and our next episode, All the Best Cowboys Have Daddy Issues, will soon come to a crashing, painful, frustrating, inelegant halt. But we will get to that, and the reasons for why I think the mid-run of Season 1 is up there with some of the worst stretches of the series. What was the meaning of Claire's nightmare? Dreams and nightmares will become a regular staple of Lost going forward, in which a person's subconscious dream state is seemingly invaded or manipulated by an external force in order to either instruct or prepare them for what is to come. However, while the dream is being moulded by this external force, the dreamer is still filling in details with their own subconscious, which is why there are sometimes personal quirks and flourishes in there. In the case of Claire's nightmare, she is still dealing with the anxiety of her decision to give Aaron up for adoption, which is ultimately what that dream comes down to. But there is a deeper reading available to us, one that I find to be very compelling when looking at the show in its totality. Dream Claire encounters a seemingly ominous and malevolent version of John Locke, who sports a white stone eye and a black stone eye, alluding to the idea that he will be torn between the light and the dark, as too will Claire. And as we know, one day there will be a dark force embodying John Locke, who will take Claire under his wing and infect her with the same darkness. And when that time comes, she will be faced with an empty crib and have blood on her hands. The dream really pays off in light of Season 6, when we see that all of these things have come to pass. Claire literally gives up Aaron to become a disciple of the Man in Black, who eventually masquerades as John Locke, and she does become willing to kill people as a result. So Claire is going to feel the pull between the light and the dark. This dream is a warning of a future that is to come. As for what the root cause of the dreams on the show are, this is a point of debate within the fandom, and I found myself wading into this on previous videos, and the episode guide is going to give me a chance to discuss each and every dream as we encounter them. I'm going to talk about my thoughts on who or what is instigating these dreams in more depth when we get to the Locke-centric Deus Ex Machina. In that episode, we will see a dream directly inspire the choices and actions of a character, and I think that's a perfect place to table this conversation for.
Have you ever considered that these dreams mean something?
Like what?
Was Richard Malkin a fraud? Richard Malkin is presented to us as a legitimate psychic here, but the show will later give us a reason to reconsider what we saw. In Season 2 episode ? There's a scene where Malkin confronts Mr. Echo and purports to be a fraud, giving us an alternative explanation for his abilities that casts some doubt upon the events portrayed in Raised by Another. While the show ultimately wants to keep Richard Malkin's abilities and claims of legitimacy relatively ambiguous, there is absolutely a correct answer to this mystery as far as I'm concerned, which is that these flashback scenes only make sense if Malkin is the real deal. I've discussed in detail why they can't add up to a coherent con in my video on Faith in the Supernatural. But for the purposes of this particular episode guide, we are only going to view these scenes through the lens that Malkin's psychic credentials are bona fide. We know that the series will go on to establish that psychic abilities are absolutely legitimate. In fact, it's only a few episodes from now until we see that Walt is one of those psychics. And we will meet various other characters along the way with supernatural gifts, or those who exhibit a degree of psychic sensitivity with untapped potential. These gifts may vary, but they absolutely exist within the Lost Universe. Malkin's abilities are perhaps more closely aligned to those that we see Walt demonstrate in an early form. The scene when Walt warns John Locke about the hatch after they make brief contact is almost the exact same mirror scene of what takes place between Claire and Malkin during her first reading. It's worth noting here that physical touch is an important recurring motif in Lost when it comes to the activation and transfer of power. The Source, at the heart of the island, uses those with psychic sensitivity to help shepherd people and events along a certain path. Telepathic forms of communication are one of the many tools available to it to get people to where it needs them to be within the tapestry of time. Now, Malkin doesn't know the specifics of Claire's future in its totality. What he sees could mirror the fragmented flashes that Desmond experiences in Season 3, receiving just enough pieces of the puzzle to construct a general picture. And those images come with strong sensations, emotions and intuitions, enough to build a working thesis from. What we see is Malkin reacting to the gravity and urgency of these feelings from within, even though he doesn't fully articulate what it is that he's seen. Clearly something beyond him is guiding his actions, and for the next few months he is driven by this feeling to help Claire, the same way Desmond is driven to help Charlie. So let's break down what happens in these sessions to get a better bead on what's going on. If Malkin is legit, then he is surely used to visions and sensations during readings, but something about Claire's future gives him a fright. He is struck by a strong sense of foreboding and he cannot handle it. Perhaps this is the closest he has ever come to connecting with the source of his own power. He claims that he saw something blurry, perhaps a succession of images flashing through his mind, too fast to make out.
What is it?
Well, we know Claire's future holds a lot of darkness, don't we? In one case, a literal connection to darkness incarnate. Could one of these things he saw in the blurry fog be the smoke monster? I mean, that would be rather incomprehensible to him, right? When Claire returns later, he is asked to reconnect with that feeling. He reluctantly does so and plugs directly into fate. He says that Claire's goodness must be an influence in Aaron's life, that she must raise her baby and not allow him to be raised by another.
There can't be another. You mustn't allow another to raise your baby.
Okay, great. Thanks for taking my 200.
No, look, take it.
I think the point of Malkin being imbued with these feelings is to make him act upon them in a specific way, to stop this blurry badness from befalling the mother and child. Once again, think of Desmond with Charlie. Whether the visions are correctly understood or merely interpreted is immaterial. It is about triggering a chain reaction of choices and events, even if the person thinks that they are trying to prevent the future or change the outcome of the pictures in their head. The reality is that you can only ever fulfill it. Furthermore, I think the reason Malkin is calling Claire in the middle of the night is because he too is having dreams. Dreams that are instructing him about what he needs to do to save her. The island has hold of Malkin now. He has become the beacon that will help guide the mother-to-be to her destination. I mean, he even knows exactly which flight to book her on.
It has to be this flight. It can't be any other. They're already scheduled to meet you when you arrive. Flight 815. Flight 815.
Whether he knows it will crash and ironically lead her into danger and darkness doesn't really matter. He feels that her boarding that plane is what needs to happen next. I've seen many fan theories claim that Malkin was indeed a con man who just received a one-off vision from the island in order to get Claire there, but that seldom makes any sense to me because he still demonstrates some psychic ability before he has that vision. He knows she's pregnant right away and she only found that out 2 days ago, and he isn't at all surprised or confused by his own accuracy there.
Huh? So when did you find out
What?
about the baby?
Another fan theory suggests that Malkin made a deal with Jacob off-screen to go through this convoluted series of events to get Claire on the plane, but I have the same problems with this as I do the con man theory. To me, Jacob's involvement doesn't make a lot of sense here, especially when we look at Malkin's behaviour and how he is organically reacting to his visions. It all seems very inconsistent with the idea that he is following a plan. I mean, just think about it this way. He sends Claire away the first time, and she never intends to return. It's only after Thomas breaks up with her months later that she decides to come back, and then Malkin says that she must raise Aaron and no one else, and starts to scare her so much that he actually alienates her, then spends the next couple of months harassing her day and night. Claire is even threatening to call the police on this guy. I mean, where is the logic in this plan at all? When she finally comes back the third time, he's changed his mind altogether and instead tells her that there's an adoptive couple in LA waiting for her. And of course, we know that he's just doing this in order to get Claire to do what he wants her to do. But this whole ludicrous plan has been going on for months now, and how Jacob is getting him to do any of this is beyond me. I think it's clear that Malkin is trying to do anything he can to rid himself of these feelings and visions in order to get Claire where she needs to be. And in my opinion, his behaviour makes no sense in either the context of working for Jacob or running a scam. I think it's worth keeping in mind for people that Malkin can be both a real psychic and a con man who uses his powers to scam people out of money, just like we see Miles doing later on. That doesn't mean his powers aren't legitimate. When we get to the Season 2 episode guide on Question Mark, we're going to revisit these flashbacks to view them through the lens of Malkin being a fake, to see how they stack up. It will be fun revisiting all of this again once we're there. What was Ethan injecting into Claire? After the incident in 1977, the subsequent fallout from the leaking energy beneath the island created a biological crisis up top, in which pregnant women would suffer complications during their second trimester. Their immune system turns on the fetus as if it were a foreign invader, and this process would effectively unmake the baby and eventually kill the mother. In Season 3 Episode 1 of Us, Juliet explains that Ethan was administering injections of a serum she had developed to help combat this problem. They considered Claire their control case, but once Ethan was exposed by Hurley, he decided to take matters into his own hands and bring Claire back to his people for safekeeping, and of course to continue administering these shots until they could successfully deliver the baby. Whether Claire survived or not was ultimately a secondary consideration for the others, despite Ethan's growing affections for her. I made a whole video on the pregnancy crisis that I recommend you check out to get the full rundown on this subject. How does the island interfere with objects? As far as I'm concerned, there's no hard and fast answer to this, since the writers keep the island's influence on the world in an abstract, nebulous space. But for me, this all comes down to causality, which is always working in the island's favour. Causality essentially means the chain reaction of cause and effect, in how one thing leads to another. In Lost, we frequently see a series of seemingly disconnected events and happenstances leading to a fated outcome. The idea being that fate is like a conductor of everyday events, getting everything moving to its tune, and our lives unknowingly become part of one big symphony. So the island doesn't have to physically stop the ink in the pens, because the causality that led to this moment at the adoption agency was already working in harmony. The pens had their own journey to get to that moment, as did the lawyer and the prospective parents. For example, perhaps those pens had been all inked out weeks before, left in a drawer, and the lawyer just happened to choose those two pens for this particular meeting because he was harried that morning and didn't have time to check them. Whatever the scenario, the point is that the island has created a wave of causality in the world in various ways, which brought all of these people and objects together in a perfect moment of synchronicity, in order to specifically influence Claire's decision. Everything is connected. And what I love so much about this moment is how subtly it hints at a design to existence, and the idea that there is a prime mover behind the scenes, giving the characters a little nudge every now and again in the right direction. And, in my opinion, it is the same prime mover that connects to people's dreams and triggers visions.
Rom?
That's right.
Great. Where are you from?
This
Ethan
episode
Rom?
also provides us with the show's first really significant intentional Easter egg. As most Lost fans already know, the name Ethan Rom is an anagram for other man. Now, I know that's not blowing anyone's minds now, but it does help to play into the double meaning of the episode title and Richard Malkin's warning. You can't let this baby be raised by another, or you can't let this baby be raised by an other, as in the others. This would begin a short-lived affinity with anagrams on the show, which later include other names, such as the funeral parlour sign Hofstrawler, which is an anagram for flash forward, and the scientific research company Mittellos, which is an anagram for lost time. These are just fun little Easter eggs that don't really affect one's enjoyment or understanding of the show, but it's cool when you do catch them. Now here's something that not everybody catches, especially if you've only ever seen the show once. We later see one of Thomas's paintings from his and Claire's apartment appear in Charles Widmore's office in flashes before your eyes. Showrunners Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse eventually clarified that there's no character connection to be inferred here, and that series director Jack Bender was a painter who liked to sneak his artwork into the background of the show. Bender's artwork can be seen more prominently on the Hatch mural in season 2. But I do like to think that somehow Widmore came into the possession of one of Thomas's paintings, and it creates a cool connection between two men who are very bad fathers. This episode is the first real test of our Losties' sense of cohesion as a group. Claire is convinced that someone is trying to hurt her, but she's not believed by the group's leader Jack, which is something that will plague his conscience in the next episode, and certainly fuel his overprotectiveness of his people going forward. Claire's visceral reaction to these experiences cause a wave of mistrust to spread, compelling Hurley to take stock of who is who. He makes a good point when he tells Jack that they don't really know each other, they're still effectively strangers.
I mean, we didn't even know each other. My name isn't Hurley. It's Hugo Reyes. Hurley's just a nickname I have, alright?
Sure, we the audience know more about a lot of them by this point, but beyond a few bonding sessions between certain characters, there are a lot of question marks surrounding everyone. And of course, paranoia and mistrust is a sub-theme of the show that we often return to, especially in the context of the others and their schemes against the fuselage survivors. We will see this crystallise further in the experiences of the tail section survivors in the other 48 days. The notion of not being believed is also a recurring sub-theme. Locke finds himself frequently at odds with Jack over this, but is also looked upon with incredulity by everyone at various points. Ben is ultimately exposed as a known liar, and therefore becomes completely untrustworthy, even when he might actually be telling the truth. Usually, any fantastic claims are met with skepticism and doubt. Hurley finds that his history with mental illness and people's perceptions of him make it hard for even his closest friends to buy into some of his claims.
What do you want me to say?
How about you believe me, man?
Hurley, they're numbers.
Shannon struggles to get Saeed and her fellow castaways to believe that she is seeing manifestations of Walt.
I need you to believe in me.
I do believe in you.
You don't.
Our survivors struggle to trust the freighter folk when they arrive. People struggle with Faraday and his inexplicable claims about the island's power.
He's still crazy.
It's on a whole new level, man.
Great.
Not believing people when they tell us that something bad is happening to them is something we continue to wrestle with as a collective culture. Of course, there has to be checks and balances so that bad faith actors like Ben don't abuse the system, but we have to be willing to listen in the first place, especially to our Claires. There is an interesting line in terms of continuity spoken early in this episode.
My mom would disown me.
She basically has already.
However, come season 3 episode Par Avion, we find out that Claire's mother Carol was already in a coma at this point, the result of a car accident whilst Claire was driving. This makes the couple's conversation in Raised by Another sound rather strange in retrospect, and Thomas's response particularly callous. Although by the end of Par Avion we see that Claire is treating her mum as if she was still part of her life, regularly visiting and catching her up on events, and behaving with the optimistic sense that Carol will one day wake up. So while this is a retcon on Claire's backstory, her line in this episode can still work, because in Claire's mind, when Carol wakes up, she will have something to say about all of this, And we can put Thomas's comment down to the fact that he's just a dick. Claire requests that the adoptive couple she meets at the agency sing Catch a Falling Star to her baby.
It's a song, like a lullaby.
Catch a falling star and put it in your pocket.
My dad used to sing that to me when I was little. Do you think you could sing it to the baby?
Well, it will turn out that Claire's father is in fact Jack's father, Christian Shepherd, and that he did indeed used to visit her when she was little. Presumably this is when he sang her the song that took root in her memory. How ironic that in this moment she too is about to become an estranged parent from her child. Catch a Falling Star will make sporadic reappearances. Kate sings it to Aaron after the island as a way of honouring Claire and keeping her memory and wishes alive. But its most memorable usage is in the season 6 episode Sundown, after the smoke monster has ravaged the temple, and Claire and Saeed emerge from the void as her haunting vocals warble the song over the scenes of carnage. My, how far that star has fallen. And if we were to really read into those lyrics in the light of the final season's revelations, the source itself is the star in everyone's pocket, and their job is to make sure that it never fades away. But I'll admit I'm stretching the metaphor a little bit. Finally, looking at our number count, this is the very first episode that actually informs us what the flight number was of the oceanic plane that crashed, and it is said by none other than Richard Malkin.
Flight 815. Flight 815.
He also spends 4 months harassing Claire. When Claire is awaiting the results of her pregnancy test, she tells Thomas that her period is 6 weeks late. 6 weeks is precisely 42 days. If only she knew what the future was about to hold for her and her unborn baby. In the next episode guide, we are going to follow Jack, Locke and Kate into the jungle as they pursue Ethan and their kidnapped people in All the Best Cowboys Have Daddy Issues. Please like, share and subscribe to keep this channel alive. Consider donating to the Patreon to help me make more videos just like this one, and check out some of the exclusive content I've made there. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back on the island.